My name is Michelle Graham. I'm 40. And you really think you can walk back in here after abandoning mom when she needed you most? My younger sister, Rebecca's voice echoed through the sterile conference room at Mercy General Hospital, her manicured finger pointing at me like a weapon. Our mother lay in intensive care after a devastating car accident. And here we were, gathered around a table with Dr. Harrison to discuss her treatment options. Rebecca, please, I said quietly, trying to keep the peace I'd been maintaining for 20 years. No, I won't be quiet, she slammed her hand on the table, making the medical charts jump. You disappeared for 2 decades, Michelle. Mom cried herself to sleep, wondering what happened to her oldest daughter, and now you show up looking like that. I glanced down at my simple black suit, conservative and unremarkable, exactly how I preferred to dress when I wasn't in court. My brother-in-law, Derek, nodded smugly beside her. Becca's right. Look at you. You can't even afford decent clothes. What kind of life have you been living? Mom always said you'd end up a failure. The familiar ache settled in my chest. They had no idea where I'd been, what I'd been doing, or why I couldn't come home for 20 years. No idea that some battles require complete sacrifice, including the sacrifice of family relationships. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should focus on your mother's condition. She needs surgery, but it's high risk. Someone needs to make the decision about. I'll make it, Rebecca interrupted. I'm the one who's been here. I'm the one who took care of her while Michelle was off doing God knows what. Actually, Derek added with a cruel smile. We've been wondering if you've been in prison. That would explain the long absence, the shabby clothes, the way you won't talk about your job. The assumption hit me like a physical blow. Prison. They thought I'd been in prison. She probably got mixed up with drugs, Rebecca continued, her voice dripping with disgust. Or worse, look at her, Derek. She looks like someone who's been through hell. Probably homeless, maybe mentally ill. I sat in silence, letting their words wash over me. In a way, they weren't entirely wrong. I had been through hell, just not the kind they imagined. Dr. Harrison looked increasingly uncomfortable. I really think we should discuss Mrs. Graham's medical needs. Doctor, you don't understand, Derek interrupted. Michelle here isn't capable of making these kinds of decisions. She's been absent from reality for a very long time. Probably unstable. You can see it in her eyes. Rebecca leaned forward, her voice taking on that patronizing tone she'd perfected in childhood. Michelle, honey, where have you been living? Are you getting the help you need? Because you look rough. Really rough. The irony was almost too much to bear. I'd spent 20 years fighting. Battles they couldn't imagine in courtrooms they'd never see against criminals whose names would make headlines. I'd put away murderers, dismantled organized crime families, prosecuted cases that made national news, and they thought I was a drug addict. Maybe we should call social services, Derek suggested. Get her evaluated before she's allowed to make any medical decisions. That's when my phone buzzed. Not the regular phone, the other one. The one that only rang for emergencies. I glanced at the caller ID. District Attorney Priority. I need to take this, I said quietly. Of course you do, Rebecca scoffed. Probably your dealer calling. I stepped into the hallway, my heart racing as I answered. Graham here. Michelle. Thank God. We have a situation. The Castellano case just took a turn. The federal judge wants to see you in chambers in 2 hours. The defense is claiming prosecutorial misconduct, and Judge Peterson specifically requested you personally. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the case that had consumed 3 years of my life. Vincent Castellano, head of the largest crime family on the East Coast. The case that had required me to live under assumed names, to cut all contact with family for their safety, to become someone else entirely. I'll be there, I said. And Michelle, the Attorney General called. He's recommending you for the Federal Prosecutor position in the Southern District. Congratulations. I hung up and stood in the hallway for a moment trying to reconcile the two worlds colliding in my life. Inside that room, I was Michelle the failure, the suspected drug addict, the family embarrassment. Outside, I was Michelle Graham, Senior District Attorney, the prosecutor who had just been offered one of the most prestigious positions in federal law enforcement. When I returned to the conference room, Rebecca and Derek were whispering conspirator ally with Dr. Harrison. We were just explaining to the doctor that you're not in a position to make medical decisions, Rebecca said with false sweetness, given your condition. My condition? Derek nodded sagely. Your obvious mental health issues, your drug problems, your complete disconnection from reality. Dr. Harrison looked deeply uncomfortable. Ms. Graham, perhaps there's someone else who could. That's when the conference room door opened and a young man in a dark suit entered. I recognized him immediately. Assistant District Attorney James Chun from my office. "Excuse me," he said, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. "I'm looking for District Attorney Graham." The silence in the room was deafening. Rebecca's face went white. "District Attorney?" James continued, oblivious to the family drama unfolding. "Ma'am, I apologize for interrupting, but Judge Peterson moved up the hearing. We need you at the federal courthouse immediately. The Castiano defense team is claiming you don't have the authority to prosecute this case." He laughed, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "As if anyone questions Michelle Graham's authority. You've only prosecuted the biggest organized crime cases in state history." Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Also," James continued, consulting his phone, "the FBI wants to coordinate with your office on the Torino family investigation. Agent Rodriguez said to tell you that the wiretaps you authorized led to 12 more arrests." Rebecca grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "Wiretaps. And congratulations on the federal appointment," James added with a genuine smile. "Southern District Federal Prosecutor. It's well-deserved, ma'am. 20 years of convictions, and you've never lost a major case." I watched my sister's face as the reality hit her. 20 years, not 20 years in prison or on the streets or battling addiction. 20 years building a career that had just reached its pinnacle. "I'll be right there, James," I said calmly. As he left, the silence stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Dr. Harrison was staring at me with new understanding. "You're your District Attorney, Michelle Graham, the prosecutor from the Morrison case, the one who took down the Benedetti crime family, among others," I said simply. Rebecca's voice came out as a whisper. But you disappeared. You never called. You never came home." "I couldn't come home. Do you know what happens to the families of prosecutors who go after organized crime? Do you understand what the Benedetti family would have done to you, to Mom, if they knew we were related?" Derek was shaking his head, in denial. "But you look so normal, anonymous." "That's the point. I've spent 20 years making sure I looked like no one special, so that no one would connect me to my family. So that the people I put in prison wouldn't hunt down my mother and sister for revenge." My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from the FBI. "Castiano verdict. Guilty on all counts. Life without parole. Congratulations, counselor." I showed the screen to Dr. Harrison. "Doctor, about my mother's surgery. I'm authorizing whatever treatment gives her the best chance. Cost is no object. I'll also need you to put her in a private room with security." "Security?" Rebecca asked weakly. "Old habits. 20 years of death threats will do that to you." I turned to face my sister and brother-in-law fully. "The reason I couldn't tell you what I did for a living is because knowing would have made you targets. The reason I looked rough when I got here is because I just finished a 3-year case that required me to live under an assumed identity." Derek found his voice, though it cracked. You're really a district attorney?" "Senior district attorney. Highest conviction rate in the state. And as of today, incoming federal prosecutor for the Southern District of New York." I pulled out my badge, the one I'd carried for 2 decades. "The reason Mom cried herself to sleep wasn't because she didn't know where I was. It's because she knew exactly where I was and couldn't tell anyone." Rebecca's legs gave out. She collapsed into her chair. Mom knew. Mom knew I was fighting criminals who would kill entire families to send a message. She knew that one phone call, one visit, one family photo could get all of you murdered. She knew that the price of keeping you safe was letting you think I'd abandoned you. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a worn photograph. It showed Mom and me at my law school graduation 23 years ago. On the back in Mom's handwriting, "My daughter, the prosecutor, I'm so proud, even if I can't tell anyone." Rebecca took the photo with trembling hands. She kept this. She had others. Pictures from my swearing and ceremony, newspaper clippings of my cases. She knew about every conviction, every promotion, every threat against my life. I sat down across from them, my voice softening. She also knew that the daughter she raised was strong enough to sacrifice everything, including her family's understanding, to keep them safe. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat about the surgery. "Full authorization." I repeated, "Spare no expense. I'll also need her medical care coordinated through the district attorney's office. Security protocols will be in place until we're sure there are no lingering threats from recent cases." Derek was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. All these years we thought. You thought I was the family failure? I was actually the family guardian. I stood up, straightening my suit jacket. I need to get to the courthouse. James is right. I don't let defense attorneys question my authority. Rebecca grabbed my arm as I headed for the door. Michelle, wait. We're so sorry. We had no idea. You weren't supposed to have an idea. That was the whole point. I gently removed her hand. But Rebecca, the next time you want to judge someone's life choices, maybe consider that you might not know the whole story. As I reached the door, Derek called out, "Why now? Why are you finally telling us?" I turned back, looking at these people who had spent the day destroying me with words, never knowing they were talking to someone who had spent 20 years destroying people much worse than them. Because Vincent Castellano just got life without parole, the last major threat to this family died in a prison cell this morning. And because Mom deserves to have her daughters by her side when she wakes up from surgery, all of her daughters. My phone rang again. This time, I answered it right there in the room. District Attorney Graham. Yes, Judge Peterson. I'll be right there. No. The defense team's challenge to my authority is without merit because I've been prosecuting organized crime longer than some of their lawyers have been practicing law. I hung up and looked at Rebecca and Derek one final time. That was a federal judge. He needs me to explain to a defense team why their client is going to spend the rest of his life in prison. I smiled, and for the first time in years, it felt genuine. It's been a long time since anyone questioned whether Michelle Graham has the authority to be in a courtroom. As I walked out of the hospital, I heard Rebecca sobbing behind me. Not tears of grief, but tears of understanding. The sister she'd written off as a failure had spent 20 years writing the book on justice. My phone buzzed with another text. This one from Mom's doctor. Your mother is asking for Michelle. She says to tell you she's proud of the case you just won. I smiled as I got into my car. Not the government sedan I usually drove, but a regular rental that wouldn't draw attention. Even after today's revelations, some habits died hard. But as I drove toward the courthouse, toward the job that had cost me everything and given me everything, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. For 20 years, I'd carried the weight of my family's disappointment along with the weight of public safety. Now, I only carried the weight that mattered. The responsibility to protect people who couldn't protect themselves, including the family that had never known they needed protecting. The little girl who used to play courtroom with her dolls had grown up to command real courtrooms. The daughter they thought had abandoned them had actually spent 2 decades making sure they were safe enough to sleep at night. Tomorrow, I'd be sworn in as a federal prosecutor. Next month, I'd start cases that would make today's victory look small. But tonight, I was just Michelle Graham, driving back to the courthouse, where I belonged, finally free from the burden of being misunderstood by the people who mattered most. Justice, I'd learned, sometimes comes in unexpected forms. Sometimes it's a conviction. Sometimes it's a moment when the people who never believed in you finally understand what you've been fighting for all along. The gavel had fallen in more ways than